We now got about 55 minutes from which have more of the company of the wonderful Mr. Derek Shelmerdine and what happened over the years on this particular day, when this particular month. Derek, welcome back to the third hour of Music for Grown-Ups.
Brilliant, been looking forward to it. Yeah, and I thought what you might do is start off with Phil Oakes, No More Songs. The reason we've chosen him today, of course, is that the 9th was the anniversary of his death. Sadly, he died in 1976, actually by his own hand. And this particular song is off his... well, it's off an album called Greatest Hits, which was ironically titled because, one, it was all new material, and two, he didn't really have any hits. Certainly not on this, and he was getting quite disillusioned. I mean, this is released in 1970, but if ever you get the chance to listen to some Phil Oakes, I mean, he was one of the premier, in my view, the best, my favourite of the protest singers of the 60s, obviously contemporary of Bobby Dylan, and he had some absolutely brilliant stuff.
I must admit, Derek, I know nothing about Phil Oakes. I wouldn't know a Phil Oakes song if it fell on me. I really wouldn't. I guess he's just that, like you say, what year did he die?
He died in 76. It's actually 6 years after this.
76, I was 18.
Yeah.
So when he was having this track, 70, I was 12. I guess this kind of thing, perhaps just I wasn't ready for it at that age.
And his earlier stuff is, your mid-60s, early mid-60s.
Yeah.
It's really, really famous stuff. We Ain't Marching Anymore.
Okay, let's listen to it. This is Phil Oakes and No More Songs. Phil Oakes there and No More Songs from 1970.
And there weren't. That was the last song on his last album, basically, and he never wrote again.
Well, that is sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
a fabulous guy.
Yeah.
Fabulous music. And if you were born in April, there are some pretty good people to tie your birthday with. Born on the 2nd, Marvin Gaye. Now, there's a name to dine on for a while. Gary Moore, guitarist, born on the 4th. Joe Meek, legendary British producer, Tornadoes, Telstar. In fact, Telstar was the first British #1 in America before the British invasion. So Joe Meek, no small feat there. Alan Clark, lead singer with the Hollies, born on the 5th. Mick Abrams, another Class A guitarist, born on the 7th. Steve Howe, who was part of the conversation about Tomorrow and Yes, like in the last show. Alan Price came to fame with the Animals, born on the 19th. And Roy Orbison. So if you're born on the 23rd of April, if you were born on the 23rd of April in 1936, you could possibly be Roy Orbison's lost twin brother or sister.
I've got a pair of dark glasses. Do you think it was me?
Oh, it'd be great, wouldn't it? That would be good. And Gary Wright, Spooky Tooth fame, born on the 26th in 1943. And on the it actually happened today. What was going on? Well, Alexis Corner, that cornerstone of British R&B. I mean, he was born on the 19th in 1928. But he pops up in a number of associations. On the 6th, he was part of the interval act at the Marquee Club in Chris Barber's band. Mentioned earlier that in the skiffle days, they used to have interval acts, and when the guys went off to the bar, the interval act would come and take the stage. Now, by 1962, skiffle was long gone, but this particular interval act was an R&B act that Chris Barber had decided that he wanted to put together for his wife, Ottilie Patterson. So with Cyril Davis, who was also with Alexis Corner as the skiffle interval act for Ken Collier. So it's a small world, and the names Chris Barber and Ken Collier might not roll off the tongue very easily, but certainly they were the rock and roll heroes before the likes of John Mayall and Alexis Corner. I mean, they really are unsung heroes of British rock and roll, and I guess one of these days we'll have to have a feature that really looks at them, because they are so influential in what's been going on. The Arwoods on the 2nd in 1965 appeared on the first ever live Ready, Steady, Go. And Art Wood, hence Art Woods, was the first lead singer with Alexis Korner's Blues Incorporated. And there's a nice tie between Cream, who were kicking off the recording for Disraeli Gears on 3rd, 1967, and Manfred Mann released Pretty Flamingo on the 15th, 1966. And there's a number of links going down here. Jack Bruce was with Manfred Mann and played on said Pretty Flamingo before he jumped over to play with Cream. And Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker left Alexis Korner's Blues Incorporated with Graham Bond to form the Graham Bond Trio. And apparently Graham Bond didn't actually tell Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce that he was leaving. Graham Bond popped over, had a word with Alexis Korner and said, "Oh, by the way, me and Jack and Ginger are off to form our own little band. Thank you very much and good night." And Free, those doyens of the early 70s, they had their first gig at the Nag's Head pub in Battersea. And Alexis Korner was very instrumental in bringing them together and actually organising that gig on his birthday, which I thought would be quite a treat to have Free playing for you. Mr. Kossoff on the guitar, veritable birthday treat. And apparently the name came from an early Alexis Korner band, Free at Last. That's pretty much it for Alexis Korner. Now we move on to Pink Floyd. And there was a press release issued on the 6th in 1968 that effectively said goodbye Syd Barrett and hello David Gilmour. I mean, by this particular time, Syd Barrett was really getting a bit the worse for weather for mind-expanding drugs and was not really performing at all. Dave Gilmour, there was about a half a dozen gigs where Syd Barrett and David Gilmour were together. So for a very brief period, the two of them did actually perform in the same band. And Buffalo Springfield have got one of the great rock and roll stories. On the 6th in 1966, it's correct that Neil Young and Bruce Palmer were driving through LA in Neil Young's hearse, and they were spotted by Steve Stills, who'd known Neil Young from seeing him, knowing him earlier, and Richie Furay were headed in the opposite direction in their own particular car. Now, the story varies as to whether they did a U-turn or whether there was a traffic jam and they jumped out. But the long and the short of it was they stopped, they said hello, exchanged a few pleasantries. Shortly afterwards, recruited Dewey Martin, the drummer, and they formed Buffalo Springfield, one of the great bands of the mid-'60s. And I thought a great song to kick off would be a Steve Stills song. It's actually from 1970, rock and roll concept of love the one you're with.
Oh, a great concept to live up to, isn't it? Love the one you're with, if you can't be with the one that you love. It's good, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But me and Derek were just talking about that, but I said I do like that concept, but I told him not to get any ideas.
No. This is not a good thing.
No.
Probably not a good thing. Good time for the Beatles, though, at this particular month. They had their first US hit when Del Shannon recorded From Me to You. Not so good time with their run of 11 number ones was broken by Engelbert Humperdinck's Release Me. They had a 6-week run at the top. And if he hadn't broken that when Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields stayed at number 2 and then dropped down, they would have had 18 consecutive number ones, because they went on to have another bunch that finished with the ballad of John and Yoko. Stevie Winwood. He was saying goodbye with Spencer Davis Group. They were doing their last tour with Steve Winwood before he went off to form Traffic. And Elton John, or Reg Dwight as he would have been, embarked on his own solo career on the 21st in 1970. And what links them, one may wonder? Well, he auditioned unsuccessfully to replace Stevie Winwood when he left Spencer Davis to go off to form Traffic.
Well, I mean, Elton John's obviously a good songwriter, a good musician, etc. But his voice isn't in Stevie Winwood's class, is it?
Gosh, no.
Miles away.
Yeah.
Miles away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could see if they were looking just purely for his vocal talents, it wouldn't have been there, would it?
Different, because it's very much an R&B band. But, I mean, well, Reg came good. Decided to become Elton John after two of his bandmates in Bluesology, Elton Dean, Long John Baldry. And Van Morrison very much was coming into the fore. In fact, he was in a band called the Gamblers. But there are two other fascinating bands also called the Gamblers. One was based in Newcastle, and they replaced the Tornadoes as Billy Fury's backing band. And in Los Angeles, there was a seminal surf rock band, Derry Weaver's band, and they released a track called Moondog. The band included Elliot Ingber, went on to early Frank Zappa, Mothers of Invention, Larry Taylor, Canned Heat, and Bruce Johnson. And Bruce Johnson, actually, on the 9th in 1965, he replaced Glenn Campbell, who in turn had replaced Brian Wilson. After Brian Wilson had his nervous breakdown. But the Belfast band, the Gamblers, shortly after Van Morrison joined them, changed their name to Them. And this song, Baby Please Don't Go, was originally a Big Joe Williams song from 1935.
It's just fantastic, that riff,
it's amazing. The bass in this.
Absolutely wonderful. Them and Baby Please Don't Go. And when did you say the first that was written?
1935.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
How people have that kind of vision.
That's right.
When most people were listening to, I don't know, who would they be listening to in 1935 in general? You know, some sort of smoochy, swoony, kind of dancey sort of thing. But
there was a lot of blues and
there was some
R&B
blues and jazz
coming
around,
to the fore then as well, I guess.
Yeah. Nothing on the radio like that, though.
Oh, no. Well, cocky.
Nothing like that.
I mean, until Radio 1 arrived in the mid-70s, there was almost nothing on the home service to listen to Saturday Club on a Saturday, spookily enough. So times hadn't changed an awful lot. But, I mean, April for the Rolling Stones across the years has been an interesting time of firsts. Mick and Keith went to see Blues Incorporated, and Brian and Charlie were actually playing in the band that particular night on the 7th in 1962. In fact, the Beatles met the Stones for the first time at the Crawdaddy in 63 on the 14th. And then a week or so later, the Stones met the guy that was to become their manager, the manager that brought them to fame. Of course, their first manager was Giorgio Gomelski. They met at the Crawdaddy, and that was Giorgio Gomelski's club, of course. And it was Andrew Oldham that completely changed the Stones' image and decided he wanted the antithesis of the Beatles. So instead of the clean-cut, suited mop tops, he created the concept of, would you want your daughter to go out with one of these? And it worked for him. It wasn't a good time for Ian Stewart, their pianist, who was the first member of the Stones, basically. He was the first guy in the group to join Brian Jones, who actually put the Stones together. Andrew Oldham decided that he wasn't quite the right image, and he was sidelined to road manager, but did play the piano on quite a lot of their record releases, and occasionally played piano in the wings in gigs. Some of their albums released in April as well. Their first album released on the 17th in 64. But interestingly enough, in 66, the Aftermath album, which was the first one with all Jagger and Richard compositions, that was very nearly called Could You Walk on Water? But Decca decided, I think, that maybe that was just a little bit too risque for the boys. And great time for British rock and roll and skiffle. The Two Eyes opened on the 22nd in 1956. And Tommy Steele is reputed to have shown Elvis around London in 1958. And this came to light on the 21st, 2008, when Bill Kenwright, an associate of Tommy Steele, was on the Ken Bruce show. And Tommy Steele wrote into the Daily Mail the following day and said, yes, that was absolutely true. So if it was in the Daily Mail, it must be a true story.
Absolutely.
Can be no doubt about that. Billy Fury, a birthday boy actually, Billy Fury, born on the 17th in 1940. He released Halfway to Paradise, a great track. And they recorded Billy Fury and the Tornadoes live, sort of live, in the studio with a bunch of enthusiastic fans providing the background. And Lonnie Donegan also has his birthday today, born on the 29th, 1931. And this next one, Rock Island Line, generally thought to be to the UK what Rock Around the Clock was to America. It was the start of British skiffle.
Oh, yes. If you're going to sing a song, sing it like that.
Oh, absolutely
wonderful.
brilliant.
I do say his fake American accent, because he is Scottish, or at least he was born in Scotland. His fake American accent at the beginning there sort of did hinge on the embarrassing, I think. You know, it just went a bit too far.
Well, nothing quite like Lonnie Donegan, I don't think. And just to mention that all of the stories in this and the Chuck Berry, all based on the book RocknRoll Unravelled. I just thought I'd mention it because what I'm in the process of doing now is doing a blog for each of the stories, like the Chuck Berry. So the actual story itself be up on the website. That's RocknRoll Unravelled, www, with two L's. And I'm actually going to I do a Friday night pub quiz on the site as well. I've decided what I'm going to do is tie it into those as well. So there will be a So You Think You Know Your Chuck Berry kind of thing. And for all of the previous shows I've done with Dave, they will be going up as well. So always worth a look to catch up.
We must have done quite a few now, haven't we? I don't know how many.
This is the 18th.
The 18th?
Yeah.
Wow. So that's 18 months.
That must be, yeah.
Because it's always been once a month,
yes.
hasn't it?
We did miss 1 month last summer.
Yes.
But yes, absolutely.
Amazing. 18.
Didn't time fly?
It does
Enjoying
indeed.
yourself.
When we are, yes, we are enjoying ourselves.
And it was a good time in the punk world as well for firsts. The Damned on the 7th in 77 were the first British punk band to play in America when they opened at CBGB. The Ramones released their debut album, imaginatively called The Ramones, on the 1676. The Clash, once again, eponymous, on the 8th, 77. And the Stranglers, quite rightly, the Four Ratus Novegicus was definitely the first album and released on the 15th of April, 1977. Happy birthday, Iggy Pop. Now, if you share your birthday, it's on the 21st. He was born in 1947. And Captain Sensible, well, Ray Burns, was born on the 24th in 1954. Led Zeppelin had an interesting time around now. PJ Proby released an album called 3 Week Hero on the 8th, 69. And that was the first album that what became Led Zeppelin, actually first time they ever actually played together. Sandy Denny sadly died on the 21st in 1978, and she was the only person to ever receive a singing credit when she did a duet on Battle of Evermore with Robert Plant on the fourth album. The Deep Purple, interesting band. A lot of things seem to have cropped up for Richie Blackmore in April over the years. He was playing with a band called Neil Christian and the Crusaders at a gig on the 25th in 1966. And that's a group that had a bunch of lead guitarists. Their first lead guitarist was Jimmy Page. And in 1968, a band called Roundabout were playing one of their very early gigs. And it came about because Chris Curtis, the drummer from the Searchers, decided to leave the Searchers and put together a slightly more heavy-duty band. But sadly, he'd moved on before Roundabout actually morphed into Deep Purple. So one could say that Chris Curtis of the Searchers is the man responsible for us having Deep Purple in our lives. So no bad legacy. And it was Richie Blackmore's final gig with Deep Purple on the 7th in 75 before he went off to form Rainbow and replaced by Tommy Bolin. And they did their last gig in 76, 15th of March. And after a gap of about 8 years, on the 27th, 1984, they were back, and Deep Purple was once more rocking the airwaves. Richie Blackmore's birthday's the 14th of April, and this is off the Burn album, 74, Might Just Take Your Life.
A new one to me, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I like that.
Definitely because of Coverdale being there. They kind of leaned towards that. They've gone slightly bluesier in there, haven't they? Yeah. I mean, I'm very familiar with the title track, Burn, but that one's just slipped me by. Don't know why. Don't know why.
I like that. Some great organ, fabulous drumming in that.
Yeah.
Well, going back to 1956, Elvis made his first appearance in Las Vegas. Everybody thinks of Elvis in the 70s in Vegas, but he was billed at the time as the atomic-powered singer. And on the 29th in 76, Bruce Springsteen very nearly knocked on Elvis's door. He was playing locally in Memphis and decided they'd pop and see him, jumped over the fence, but the security guard grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. Do you know who I am? Don't really care, and slung him out. But it did appear that Elvis wasn't at home. He was away gigging somewhere, so he wouldn't have seen him anyway. And Jerry Lieber, Lieber and Stoller wrote a bunch of hits for Elvis and others. Born on the 25th in 1933. Sadly, on the 4th in 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis by James Earl Ray. And American rock and roll was going through some really interesting times. The Midnighters, Work With Me Annie, one of the first R&B crossover hits that was very popular with black and white audiences, released on the 10th in 54. Buddy Holly's career was just starting with Blue Days and Black Nights, his first single on Decca in 1656. And the Everly Brothers had just started their rise to stardom with their first release on Cadence on the 20th, 57, Bye Bye Love. And Eddie Cochran also sadly died 1960 on the 17th. He just finished a British tour and was on the way, wanted to get back to America, so left the gig in Bristol, and sadly the car crashed near Chippenham and he was taken to hospital but died. He was backed by Marty Wilde's Wildcats, who actually included Brian Bennett and Brian Licorice Locking, later went on to become quite popular Shadows. But Dave Harmon, police cadet, went on to fame as frontman as Dave D for Dozy Beaky, Mick and Titch. And one of the other birthdays, one of the greatest bluesmen of them all, McKinley Morganfield, Muddy Waters. He was born on the 4th in 1915. And this is Mannish Boy.
He's taking over my job.
Now, don't you wish you were there?
Fantastic stuff. Muddy Waters and the Mannish Boy.
Yeah. 6/4 time.
Wonderful, wonderful. Used to sing that all the time in the sort of schoolboy bands that I was in, and boy, did I enjoy myself doing that.
Everybody used to play that.
Yeah,
cover
wonderful.
Version. Sort of thing you just play all night. But more birthdays. There are always lots of birthdays. If you're a Fairport Convention fan, Dave Swarbrick, born on the 5th, and Richard Thompson on the 3rd. Jefferson Airplane, Jack Cassidy on the 13th, and Skip Spence on the 18th. You may remember Skip Spence was on the first Jefferson Airplane album's guitarist, as a drummer, and decided that he'd had enough of that and went off and formed Moby Grape and went back to playing the guitar. Richard Manuel of the band, a band's band, as they say, born on the 3rd in 1943. But it was a really interesting time for the Who, because on the 9th in 1964, they failed their audition for Fontana and BBC Radio on the same day. Very similar story. There was a guy from Fontana there was Chris Parmenter, and he decided that the drummer Doug Sandham wasn't quite a match for the band, in much the same way that the Beatles, Pete Best, fell foul of George Martin, the drummer at their essential first audition. And Doug Sandham played his last gig on the 13th, and Keith Moon joined the band. And then on the 30th, they went for the second audition with Chris Parmenter, and he liked them, and they went. And they actually changed their name. They were the Who when they did that, and then they decided to change their name to the High Numbers. They had one single, and then decided, oh, we'll change our name back to the Who. And in 1967, the Who were touring in Germany, and John's Children were with them. And John's Children weren't particularly notable as being heavyweight musicians, but as heavyweight having fun people. And the Who really tired of the antics a little, and they slung them off this German tour. But one person who did go on to some fame and fortune from John's Children was Mark Bolan, who later decided that he'd form Tyrannosaurus Rex. And in fact, on the 19th in 1968, he released Deborah, a wonderful, wonderful song, psychedelic folk. So much fun there. But by the time the Who got to 1971, on the 26th of April, they played their last gig at the Young Vic as part of the recordings for Lighthouse, which Townsend sadly abandoned. But if we look at more birthdays, on the 1st, 1946, Ronnie Plonk Lane was born, and Peter Frampton was born on the 22nd, 1950. And sadly, Steve Marriott died on the 20th. Now, obviously, Ronnie Lane and Steve Marriott were part of the Small Faces. And after Marriott split from the Small Faces, he got together with Frampton and formed Humble Pie, and became really one of the great rock bands of the early 70s. And this is Stone Cold Fever.